should we just introduce ourselves? Is that best, or?
Sure.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
My name is Helen Atkins. I'm a visual artist. I work and live in Albuquerque, New Mexico. I was born and raised here as well. I got my start in a public art program when I was 18. That was like the start of my creative career, and I worked for the Mayor's Art Institute, and they did mosaic murals on public spaces. So I worked for that for about 7 years. And while I was getting my degree at UNM, and I just sort of fell into this community engaged art practice. So I kind of balance my private studio time. I have a studio here at the Harwood Art Center, and my public and community engaged work, where I work in a lot of public art and a lot of organizations like Off Center, the Harwood Art Center, and I've worked for Artful Life and Art Street. So I work with a lot of communities that are experiencing different vulnerabilities, from homelessness to other issues. And then that sort of influenced my private practice, which is really human focused and figurative. That's a little bit about me.
And I'm Will Gabaldon. I'm originally from Belen, New Mexico. I went to UNM undergraduate, got my BFA there, and then I went to University of Pennsylvania for my MFA. Lived in New York for a little over a decade. Now I live in Chicago. I'm a painter and a teacher here. Helen, it's funny that you mentioned the Mayor Arts program. I did that when I was like right out of undergrad, right before going to graduate school that summer. I was part of the murals.
Awesome.
Portion of it. I don't know if it's the same anymore. I mean, that was like 20 years ago, but like.
Yeah, so that program is still going on. It's been housed by different organizations throughout the years, and now they're their own nonprofit organization, Alma. And I was kind of involved right when they started their own nonprofit. That's kind of when I sort of stepped away from that program, but it's still going. And it's funny because I meet a lot of people who have at one time been involved in a summer program or not. Yeah. So it's kind of like a common theme amongst different New Mexican artists I've seen.
Yeah, it was funny because it was, I was working at a liquor store, Jubilation, and plug for Jubilation. And then I saw that, or I don't know if I saw it or if somebody told me about it, but I applied for it. And initially I was trying to get into the, because at the time, at least, there was like an easel painters portion of it. Mm-hmm. And that's what I applied for, but I didn't get that. I got like the actual murals part. And yeah, we made these murals that like hung in the convention center for a while. I don't know where they are now, but it was like it was a big deal that summer because it paid pretty well.
It's still going on at the convention center. It moved it went to a library for a while, and now it's still going on there. And it's super funny because the Harwood Art Center used to house that program when I was involved, and now they've started another program that's centered on public art, but it's more sculptural. And now I'm a lead artist in that program, so I'm teaching youth who are kind of like the same age when I got involved. And one of our apprentices, her mom was involved like right at the start of the program as well. So it's kind of just this really big, almost like system that's going on in Albuquerque that's like pushing out all these artists. So yeah.
Yeah, that's awesome. Because I just assumed it was like, because I think even at the time when I was there, it was sort of like, is this going to continue? Because it was sort of like the mayor had to keep like pushing for it essentially in order to keep funding for it. But I thought it was like an awesome opportunity because it was like, at least at the time, it was all high school kids would apply as your like apprentices, and they would help you execute the murals. So it was all like teenagers, and which is funny now because like I was 23, something like that, and like I had I had apprentices that were like up to like 19 at the time. I seemed like
Yeah.
so much older than them, but now I'm like, now it's funny being a high school teacher, being like 41. It's like, no, now I'm really older.
Yeah, that's kind of how it was for me too, because I stayed in and I sort of like got into a leadership position there, and I felt much older than the new apprentices who were coming in their teens, and I was only like 22 or 23. And now I'm only 26 and I'm leading a program, but I feel that every year I'm like, okay, now I'm actually older. And I think
Yeah.
that's just kind of how it's going to go
Yeah.
every year for me.
So what is your primarily your medium as far as what you do?
So I work in a lot of different mediums, and I think that's kind of just been like the consequence of having to work in the arts, like having to find jobs in the arts. So I work with ceramics, sculpturally, and also in mosaics, so in 2 dimensions. And then I also do painting, oil painting, and mural painting as well. So I work with another youth group, middle school age group, and we do murals at their schools and then a mural for a public exhibition once a year as well. So I kind of just do a lot of different mediums. At the moment, I'm focusing on 3 different series that are in different mediums, but all of which have this common vein. And so I wanted to blend these lines between reality and like a dreamlike scape, and to create work that gives off the feeling of body memory. It sort of landed on this engagement with anxiety and what I am anxious about. Talking about the anxiety of, you know, giving birth or becoming pregnant or becoming a mom. So sculpturally, I'm working with a lot of the same themes as I do in my painterly work. I'm combating a lot of like skinny supremacist and white patriarchal norms in my sculptural practice. And I do that by examining what it means to grow, and doing that in a very literal way and then also in a very abstract way.
Would this like how is the quarantine impacted all this? Is like none of this going on right now?
So for like 2 months, like nothing was happening, and it was really stressful because it was like, am I going to have work? What am I going to do? Because, you know, the primary way that I live is off of these like community programs or public programs. And so for a while it was like, what's going to happen? And then a couple of the programs that I worked for were deemed essential over the summer. And so then it was like awesome that I could start working again, but then we had to restructure everything. So like no more sharing tools, and no more like, you know, being really close. So it's been super hard to try and teach like high school age and early college age mosaic work without being like really close in contact with them. Right. So it's kind of been just like a complete redesign and a lot of administrative work that I never really saw myself doing. Yeah. But the major program that I'm working for this summer, we're finishing up a mosaic bench in a park. So we're doing it. We're making it happen. So it's been good. What about you? Have you been, so you're a professor as well, and or you're high school teacher?
High school teacher, yeah. I did teach college at a community college in the Bronx for a couple of years, the last 2 years that I was in New York. But when I moved to Chicago, I got a job at a very small private school where I taught for 4 years ceramics and art. And now I'm going to a public school this fall. So that'll be like a little bit of a change. But yeah, you know, yeah. I had a lot of curriculum control at my last school, and I tended to give the students like a lot of time to work on projects. I always thought that was like really important. That's like such a big part of like an artist's practice is
Yeah,
just getting enough time with the thing that they're trying to do, you know?
definitely.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, the thing that we all, I mean, I know that that's the biggest hurdle for me to overcome is having that time to really like dedicate to an idea with like the adequate amount of time to give to it. It's always hard to find.
Yeah.
Yeah, because it's not those clear ends, right, to your day, like that 9 to 5 schedule. It's kind of like everything is just nebulous for me anyways. It's like I'm picking up and dropping things at all hours of the day and just kind of in this continual state of work.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, that's exactly what it is. You're prioritizing that time
Mhm.
and trying to give yourself, you know, times of the day to do it when you're sort of at your best, because it tends to be you're very focused. It can be very draining. You don't want to
Yeah.
be doing a lot of work like after like a long day at work. It's like very difficult to do, you know. You find a lot of strategies, or at least I try to just how to like make things with the time that you have,
Yeah.
whether that's like the scale of the thing that you're doing or the medium,
Yeah.
um, or like being able to work in like sort of like bursts. You really have to be like adaptable uh, for that, because you know if you're the type of artist that just you know I have to have just 8 open hours during the
Yeah.
day where it's totally free. I can do whatever I want, and that's the only way I can make work. It's like that's you're not going to be like maybe you can be making work when you're in college. And then
Yeah,
it's
I
like
guess
the rest of your life you're not going to be making work. So
a question I always have for artists is, so what is like a hobby that you have? Because what I've found very difficult in my life is like identifying actual hobbies and things that I do for like the pure fact to do it, as opposed to like the passion that I love, which is art. So I'm always curious, like what do you
like a
have?
hobby,
Yeah.
like something that I'm like some other thing that I want to be doing that I'm kind of semi-serious at. Uh, when I
Mhm.
was a lot younger, I used to like skateboard. I don't really do that anymore. I have 2 little kids, so you
Mm.
know, like most of my free time goes to them now. But I'm, you know, thinking back to like before having them, like 5 years ago. Yeah, it was probably just guitar, but really there wasn't much time
Yeah.
to do anything. Most things were like art related, whether it was like studio time, going to museums, going to shows,
Yeah.
and then any other sort of free time was like reading or watching like a movie or a show or something like that, to
That's
just
kind
like kind of
of
decompress.
that's kind of what I've noticed. I feel like a lot of artists have that like area of their life kind of missing, where they just don't have the time or the attention to give to it. And I was realizing a lot of my friends who aren't artists like have hobbies or have things that they devote a lot of time to, just purely to devote the time to it, not necessarily to make a living or to like further their career. So yeah, I'm always curious about that, like if we're kind of neglecting ourselves in that way.
Yeah, you know, when I started teaching, one of the stipulations was I had to teach ceramics as well, and I had you know, I had taken some ceramics classes, so I knew roughly how to do it, but I'm not a ceramicist. And I wasn't sure, you know, I knew that I could do it well enough to teach it, but I wasn't sure like exactly like how much I would enjoy it, like sort of day in, day out. But I really loved it, and um, you know, really wanted to push myself to get better at it, wheel throwing in particular, and then really getting into like Japanese ceramics
Mm.
and you know, just different Danish ceramics, like different like types of ceramic traditions that I thought were like really fascinating. So that sort of became like a little bit of a hobby like the past 4 years, because I don't see it as like my primary art making. It's
Mhm.
almost just it's more of just like a pure craft to me. Not that it has to be that way for everybody,
Mhm.
but for me, I really look at it like that, and it's really it's really nice. I mean, sometimes it makes me like really envy that type of like functional ceramicist, that sort of like life, because um, painting can have so much attached to it, and it can be very, uh, fraught with all kinds of associations and like heaviness of like how important it is, or what you're doing, why you're doing it, like all of those things. So when you're making sort of like a utilitarian object, um, but you're trying to make it as well as you can and trying to make it as beautiful as you can, it's just like a very nice, coming from being a painter, it's like a very nice situation to be in. I imagine that must be what it's like for somebody to like put together like a giant puzzle or something like that. Some other like type of hobby, like building a little ship or whatever. It's like you're just worried about um, how well you're doing that thing, and like just sort of spending the time doing it.
Yeah.
You don't have to like worry about
There's not that same pressure.
right. Yeah,
Act.
like how it's going to be interpreted, or um, how how dismissive people are going to be of it or not, or even like how you feel about it. Um, it can be a lot of times. I mean, I don't feel this way that much anymore, but a lot of times artists can feel very defensive or protective of like their work, and almost like it's an extension of themselves. I don't feel that way about ceramics. It's like if something comes out really bad, I just throw it away. Like I just, it's like not even like, I don't even think about it. Or if somebody wants to say like, oh, that's not that good, I don't take it personal, because I'm not like a professional ceramicist or anything.
So I was looking at your work and I was just wondering, so the landscapes and the portraiture, they seem very similar to me. They have a very similar feeling. And I was wondering if that's how you feel, or if they're from like two different veins of your work.
No, I'm actually glad that you feel that they're similar, because they are very similar to me. Although I feel like a lot of times with figurative work, just the fact that it's a person, and especially if it's like a non-narrative figurative work, like a portrait, which is like mostly what I do with the figures, like portraits, that there's almost like oh, that's a person type of response to painting like that from a lot of people. Not everybody, obviously, but a lot of people tend to see that type of painting as like not as interesting somehow, because it's like because there isn't a story, or there isn't like a particular if it's not, if like the style is not particularly crazy or anything, like a lot of people can tend to write off work like that, because they just they see another person, which I find really curious to me, because a lot of my favorite paintings are those types of paintings, like just very well done, super interesting, like portraits of people.
Yeah.
And a lot of the most famous paintings, like that's exactly what they are. And I've always thought like, really, how can you get any more interesting than those types of paintings? Because like, just as people, it's like we want to be able to look and study other people. And the painters that are able to, sort of create these sort of stand-ins for people. And I don't even mean like just like an image. I think great figurative paintings are almost like more of like a presence than anything. They're not just like a photograph, like a representation of somebody. There's like something like deeper there. And I think that's why paintings like that are continue to be looked at.
Yeah.
So yeah, so go ahead.
No, it's just so interesting because I feel a lot of what you're saying. When I was in college, I studied a lot of Byzantine art, and I got really into like Byzantine icons.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not like religious. I just was interested in this idea of like a portrait of a person being this portal of communication, right, to this other world. And I feel that sense of like a very good portrait could become this stand-in for maybe not even a particular person, but just that idea of personhood.
Yeah.
Yeah. Which, and I was going to ask you, my next question was going to be if you feel like your figurative works are received differently. So you kind of already answered that. So.
You know, there's plenty of portraiture that's like very technically well done, or you know, sort of like photorealistic. I mean, there's all kinds of different ways of painting people, but a lot of it is like just kind of boring because there isn't that sort of like presence to it. And that's what I'm always trying to get in my portraits. Like I want it to feel more like an actual presence, or like an actual person, rather than just like an image of a person.
Yeah.
You know, so, but you know, in the same way, like the you know, like you were saying that the landscapes and other paintings are similar in feel. Yeah, you know, that's by hopefully design on my part, as far as like the same thing. Like, you know, I don't want to just paint like any random like landscape or whatever. Like there has to be something there in the painting for it to
Yeah.
be, for me to want to do it, or to, you know, I destroy a lot of work, and I get rid of a lot of stuff, because if that isn't there, I just don't, you know, I'll start over, or just get rid of it. So I'm glad, yeah, I'm glad that you saw that.
When I was looking at your work, the thing that kind of struck me was this sense of loneliness, or like a guarded vulnerability in the figures and the scenery and the landscapes. Like there was this sense of real openness, but then also like a bit of it was reserved or closed off. And I was just wondering if that is any of the feelings or anything that you're conveying, or if I'm kind of on like a whole
No,
other track.
those are pretty like apt descriptions. I think that I don't know that I'm ever like going in to like do a particular thing, other than, you know, I mean, this is the way like I approach painting, or I try to approach painting, which is the way that a lot of the painters that I really look up to tried to approach painting, was that, you know, I have an inclination to do it. I might have like some sort of person or image or something that I kind of want to make a painting about, but ultimately it's like the painting is like sort of presenting something to you that you didn't know until the painting was done, or that the painting presented to you. So, you know, that's going back to like getting rid of a lot of stuff. If like the painting doesn't have that in the end, then it's like, it's not worth it. So, you know, that's kind of feeling um, that's there. That's something that like, that I'm sort of looking for that as much as like anybody else is looking for that. So I don't really like, you know, if that's there, it's just because that's what comes out. It's not because it's like I'm like willing it into like existence or anything like that. Um, yeah.
So when you're like choosing a person to paint, I always, because working figuratively, I always find this like a difficult or touchy process point. Like, how do you choose your figures? Do you ask people, or like what's that process like?
Yeah, I've done, you know, most of them are friends or family. I think that's the interesting thing there is like friends and family, like I know them so well that it's like, so you have like problems on with every like scenario. So if you're painting like people that you know really well, it's a lot easier um, to know when there's like something there in the picture, because you know the actual like person and like the sort of presence of the person. But if you are painting somebody you don't know well, or somebody, or just from like a photograph or something, or um, you can sort of play around with that a lot more, like the
Mhm.
actual image of that. So if you need to change something, like it's like I don't know this person, so I can actually like bring out other things in this picture that I wouldn't be able to do if it was like a picture of like a close friend or something like that. I would feel weird changing like something about somebody that I knew really well, you know. But
Yeah.
if it's just like a random image, like I don't feel weird at all. Like, oh, I'm gonna change like whatever, like eye color or like facial structure or whatever. It's almost like you're just using that image as like a um, just like a scaffold or like a structure to put something on top of.
Yeah. Like an
So
armature.
yeah, and you know that has its own benefits. That being said, like I don't do like I feel like those paintings for me have like a higher failure rate. So
Mhm.
I don't have as many of them.
Yeah.
And I've kind of gotten to the point now with figurative work that I still love doing it, and I still make them, but it's like it's rarer. So
I was
that's why like
that.
the other paintings like the other types of paintings I do are just a much easier to do because like I don't have to deal with people in order to make them really.
Yeah. I mean, I was noticing that when I was looking at your work online. You know, you have it sectioned off by year, and it seemed as like the years were going on that the figures became less and less, and it almost seemed like the pieces themselves became more and more like simple and abstracted. So I don't know. I was just noticing that, but it's funny that you mentioned that you're, you know, doing less of that portraiture work.
Yeah, the simplification is sort of part of that is, you know, you might also notice that a lot of the pieces become smaller and smaller, and that's like a lot of that is just like practical stuff. So, you know, around the time that my first daughter was born, it's like everything got super tiny, and uh, you know, and I didn't make as much work because it's like you just don't have as much time, and don't I didn't have as much space to do
Yeah.
anything. Um, so now it's as they're getting a little bit older, and I have a little bit more time. Like things are getting a little bit bigger again, and I'm like making a little bit more work um, than I had been previously. But it's like you know, things come up in your life, and you have to sort of respond to that. That was like an interesting thing about living in New York was there was this massive pressure to be making like giant work because
Mm.
that's what galleries want to show, or at least like decent sized, like big, like human sized work, you know. Um, but it's, you know, it's super hard to have any space there to be
Yeah.
doing like work like that. So the other thing is like there's all this pressure on you to do that, but some people, some people are just inherently like you know small. They want to work in a smaller scale. Like that's just what they do. There's plenty of examples of like great painters that only made like small to medium sized work, you know,
Yeah.
like
A
almost
professor,
everything by, go ahead, sorry.
they once told me that like everyone has a scale at which they like produce the best work, and I don't know if this is like true or how much like you can put on this, but I do think to a certain extent like it's kind of true. Like when you find that scale that you operate best in, you kind of do your most natural work. And I know I think there's that pressure kind of everywhere that bigger is better, that the bigger something is, um, the more of like an impact it's going to have.
Yep.
And I sometimes struggle with that idea too, because like my thing is I don't want to make something big unless I know it can go somewhere, because I don't want to hold
Right.
on to it.
You know, the other thing is like historically, you know, prior to the mid 20th century, it's like work tended to be pretty medium sized to small because, you know, if you were going to put in a house, that's how the size that it had to be. People didn't have like giant spaces for these huge paintings. I
Yeah.
mean, huge paintings were salon paintings or like museum paintings. and they were commissioned specifically for that, but now it's like, how many people, it's like everything I do is like a giant 6-foot painting. And, and then there's painters that I love, like, I don't know, like Luke Toymans, for example, who started off as like a medium size range painter. And I think sort of like the pressures of the market, and probably his gallery a little bit, like pushed him to make much larger work. And the larger work, in my opinion, is not as strong as the smaller work. In fact, it's just sort of like the smaller work just blown up. It's like, oh, I'm going to use a bigger brush or something like that, but everything stays the same. And that doesn't always work, It's in the same way that there are painters that their scale is the best at like a big scale, that probably wouldn't be able to make like something small. It's very difficult to make something that's like this big that catches your attention across the room, and like you want to go up and like look at it and like,
And I feel like there's this thing that happens in your brain when you're looking at something that's big. Like you just don't notice any flaws, quote unquote. I don't know. But like when something's more like to scale with like your personhood, like, I don't know, you can notice things more. So I think, I try to not be super just impressed by large work just because it's big, right? But I think what's been really nice for me is that I've been involved in public artwork for so long, and that gives me the opportunity to work at a big scale in a meaningful way.
Well, yeah, I mean, doing murals, the large scale totally makes sense. It's like these pieces are supposed to be seen by a lot of people in like a big public space,
Yeah, no, I think that's always interesting, is like the practicality behind things. Like I often have people asking me like why I chose a certain color or why I chose this or that. Like sometimes the honest answer is because I had it. Like I had this material and I had to use it. And it reminds me of my partner, my boyfriend. He's a ceramicist as well, and for a while he was doing like markets and craft fairs. And he had like one glaze that he was using on everything. And he would often have customers be like, oh, you should make stuff in like blue or green. And his response was like, well, you should give me some money so I can buy more glazes. And I always thought that was an interesting response. The practicality of being an artist and, buying their materials and having, what you have on hand and what you can do with the space and the material that you have. So
that's a huge part of being like a resourceful, creative person. And actually, like creativity, I try to teach my students this all the time. And in fact, I give them parameters all the time, because it's those parameters that like sort of draw out their creativity. You're only as creative as the parameters that you have around you, the limitations that you have to work within. If you have unlimited resources, or, you can just think of anything, sometimes that's like a paralyzing place to be in, if you have like so many options of, what you're going to be doing or what you're going to be working with. And there's so many examples of like great works of art that were made because of the limitations, like Picasso's blue and rose periods. Like literally it's because he was too poor to buy anything else. Those were like the cheapest colors, and he just had a bunch of them. And it's like, he's like reusing canvases, and he makes, besides Cubism, probably like his most famous work is from that period. Same thing with de Kooning, during the Depression. He just buys like black and white paint and makes a whole series of just like black and white pictures just with black and white house paint, because it's cheap and he can just, buy it and use a lot of it. I mean, there's so many examples of that, that, and a lot of times like that's like the best work that artists make. And actually later, when they become a lot more successful and they have like and they can do whatever they want. Sometimes it's not as good.
Yeah.
Says the earlier stuff.
One of my other day jobs, I work for Off Center, which is a like an open community studio. So it's totally free, and it runs basically on donations. And most of our studio artists who come in are experiencing homelessness or have experienced homelessness, and I'm always just blown away by the use of material and the cleverness in the use of material. And we have this artist who he like varnishes his really nicely done oil pastels with like floor wax, and it looks super cool. And it's just something that's like it's what I had, and now it's what I use, you know. And I think that's always just like a really good place to exist, is like remembering that like the rules aren't real rules, and you can sort of stumble upon really cool things out of necessity a lot of the times.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, yeah, you know.
Yeah, you know, when I'm working with, like, because I'm not a teacher, I do like teaching artist stuff, but I don't consider myself necessarily a teacher. But I've noticed that when I'm working with teens, especially, they have this idea that realism is best, and then they totally like it's this mindset that I don't know how to be helpful with, because a lot of times I'll have students who are really talented in ways that they don't understand that they're talented yet. So like whether it's they're really naturally good at like at color, or they're really like they're just able to capture some sort of like character or just nuance with their line work, but they don't see it as useful at all, because I think especially with public schools, this like sort of indoctrination that like realism is best. So that's always been a struggle for me when I'm doing any like teaching artist work, is how to be helpful when that's the mindset.
Yeah, I mean, that comes up all the time. And in my my projects that I would give students would like sort of go between like kind of traditional methods to, you know, like more abstract design-based work. And a lot of times, like the students that were really good at sort of traditional drawing would really hate when we were just doing some sort of design-based thing, you know?
Yeah.
And vice versa, like the students that weren't as good with traditional drawing would be like really good at like design. Sometimes I think it's because they came to those projects without any like preconceptions about what they could or couldn't do or what it was supposed to look like. So they were really taking like the design principles to heart and actually like trying them out. Whereas like the students that were more adept at drawing realistically, they just, you know, they wanted to show off like their talents, and they couldn't in this way. And you know, having like a good design sense is going to pay off for them later if they continue to make realist work. But you know, that's like a lesson that they have to really learn. But it's important to do both, especially as a student, to just be out of your comfort zone, be doing things that you haven't done before.
Yeah.
Like that's.
And I sort of think that like what you were talking about with your painting, in this idea of like you know, you approach a piece and you don't necessarily know what it's going to be when it ends. You just kind of like in the experience of creating it, right? And like so, and then like you as the artist, you sort of curate which pieces are like finished to your sort of liking, or to your to what you deem as like good or bad. But I think like it's almost something that happens in your brain later in life. Like I think I look back at myself when I was a teenager, and I was really like, you know, I was really into realism, and I was really into like figurative work, and I was really critical if something didn't look how it looked in my brain, if I couldn't make it happen on paper, right? And then I think it was like after college that like some other area of my brain started to work, where I was more interested in like the process of whether it would be painting or sculpting, and like that manipulation process, and not so focused on the like on what was going to be the output. And I think it's just something that happens later in life, or some area of your brain that starts to activate like the more you do it.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, the hardest thing to teach, or the thing that's probably impossible to teach actually, is just that inner desire to always be able to make something like better or more interesting, or like really trying to figure out like, what am I looking for in this thing? Because as like students, a lot of the times like the problem is like their like threshold for what's good or bad is like very, very low. So
Yeah.
the minimal amount of effort is like considered like good enough. And they're like, it looks great, right? And you have to like really show them why it does or doesn't. But the thing that separates like, just somebody taking an art class from somebody that's could possibly be an artist is that inner desire to just always want to get better and like just keep doing it like over and over, and like trying to look for that kind of unfindable thing in their working, and that's really the thing that separates people, like people that will probably do some sort of creative endeavor and people that won't really.
Yeah.
And I don't know if you can even really teach it,
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean that. Yeah, you learn that over time, I guess, as a teacher. Well, Helen, it was really great talking to you about your work in Albuquerque, reminiscing about Albuquerque, and thank you for asking about my work and looking at it thoughtfully. I appreciate it.
I know. I loved like seeing your work, and I was really it was really captivating for me. So I'm really happy to have met you and to have got some time to pick your brain about stuff. And it's really cool that you're a teacher as well. I've noticed that in a lot of really great painters, that they're also teachers. So
Yeah,
it's cool
well,
to
it
see
does.
that.
It definitely like it forces you. This is the common thing that's said about teaching. Like you have to really know it in order to teach it.
Yeah.
So it really does. If you're not good at something, like teaching will make you good at it, because because like your students will just see through you like immediately. If you can't show them how to do something, like they will be like, oh, you actually don't know what you're doing. So you really have to figure it out.
It's very true. Right. Thank you so much. It was really good to meet you.
Yeah, thank you.
All right. Bye.